Hey everyone, I want to make a response video today to a recent article I read on the site called Vulture, which is the culture and entertainment website for New York Magazine. And this article seeks to build or suggest a new canon of literature for the 21st century. And it's a bit premature because I assume at like the end of 2020, everybody's going to be coming out with these lists of like what are the greatest books of the 21st century so far. But they want to do it now. And it was an interesting exercise, I thought. And of course, because it's a list, like all bookworms love a list. And I don't feel like sort of cynical about this. I think we should happily indulge in these like list making things because we have books that we really care about and want to defend and talk about, and so it is sort of fun to pit them against each other and say like, no, this is the most important book ever, and yeah, so I think it's just sort of fun. And I thought it was interesting how they went about this. So they took a survey of a whole group of critics from like mainstream book reviewers for big publications, and then like critics from more niche publications to try to get a wide diversity of opinion about what might be the greatest books of the 21st century so far. And it's interesting the results that they came up with. And so I want to give my response of like, whether out of the books I've read on the list, do I think these books stand up, and possibly suggesting some other alternative books, which I think could be considered as some of the greatest books of the 21st century so far. And it's interesting how they describe this exercise. They know it's a sort of self-indulgent exercise, which doesn't really mean all that much, but is just a fun thing to talk about. And I like how they describe it as the purpose was not to build a fixed library, but to take a blurry selfie of a cultural moment. And I really like how that captures that, a blurry selfie of a cultural moment. It's just like an impression of what we think are the greatest books that have been produced this century so far. And they have come up with like a more diverse, interesting list than what are typical canon books, which are predominantly by straight white men. And so this list of 100 books, there is more gender diversity in it, that it is roughly half male and female. There is more cultural diversity and books from different nations. And they also include a lot of like cross-genre novels. And like I talked about in the Booker shortlist video I made recently, of how literature today is really like a blend of different genres, and like novels have always been this way and incorporated different forms of writing and fiction into making a novel. But I think now more than ever, there is a lot of crossover in between genre fiction and like literary fiction, and it's a blend of all different kinds of types of writing. So looking at this list, I'm not going to talk about them all because that would take ages and ages. And out of this list of 100, I've only read 25 of them, which I feel a bit ashamed about. I feel like I should have read more, or I should have my like finger on the cultural pulse more. But I'll put the list below, so have a look and see how many you've read, like just for fun. It doesn't. I don't think. I know it's something that like we shouldn't feel guilty about whether we've read all these books or not. It's just the opinions of some people, but this is how we feel. And so yeah, so I've read 25 of them, and it's interesting how out of the people they surveyed, some of the books, they said around a dozen of them have had more than one or multiple votes. And then there's a group of, I think like 25 or so, which have like 2 votes. And then the rest of the books they just compiled had 1 vote, and that they thought really should stand out on this list. And so looking at the ones, like the most voted for one is The Last Samurai by Helen DeWitt, which was made into a film with Tom Cruise, which I never saw, and I didn't even realize had come from a novel, and I wasn't aware of this novel and haven't read it. So But then going through the list of ones that I have read, there's the Corrections by Jonathan Franzen, which did get 6 votes. And I have read this, I have read Freedom, and I really enjoyed both books. I thought they were great, really interesting books, but they don't necessarily stand out in my mind as like the greatest books that have come out in the 21st century so far. And taking aside all the controversy around Jonathan Franzen in the Oprah's Book Club and his sort of snobbishness about only wanting to have literary readers, his fiction is really good reading, interesting, but yeah, in my mind doesn't really stand out. Then Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I sort of controversially, this is really not my favorite book by Ishiguro. And I feel like I must have missed something, because I know other people have said it's one of their favorite books of all time, and but in my mind, so many of his novel The Unconsoled stands out for me as a much greater, more interesting book, which I think was published at the end of the 90s, around 98 or 99. And but yeah, Never Let Me Go, it just didn't really stick in my mind. There's The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson. This is amazing, and did really blow me away. There was so much hype around this before it was published and when it was published, and I read it sometime after that, and I was just swept away by her critical thinking, her really dynamic way of looking at gender and family, and it's a beautiful, amazing book. I would totally put this on this list. The Sellout by Paul Beatty, which won the Booker Prize a couple years ago. I thought this novel was okay, and it's another novel that came with a lot of hype around it, and then obviously it won the prize, and but I just didn't really. I didn't really connect with it all that strongly. And on the Booker Prize that year, I really wanted Madeline Thien's novel, Do Not Say We Have Nothing, to win instead, which I think is an incredible, amazing novel, and definitely should be counted as one of the best books of the 21st century so far. I know that Sean the Bookmaniac will agree with me, because it just gives such a complex, interesting look at history and family. And Paul Beatty's novel is responding to a lot of the politics in America, but just as a story, it didn't come together with me, and it felt more like a concept than a novel, just for me. Then there's, and I should say about the 25 that I have read, I can't really totally count a few of them, because they've grouped a few novels of when there's a trilogy of books. So with Rachel Cusk with her Outline trilogy, they count that all as one book, and also Margaret Atwood's trilogy of the Mad Adam trilogy. And with both of those trilogies, I've only read the first book in that series, so I don't know if I can really count that I've read them or not. And then also, I have to admit, they count the Harry Potter novels and in that as one group, and I've only read the first novel in the J.K. Rowling series, and I don't know if that should be a guilty admission or not, but yeah, I just read the first book. I thought it was fine, and I know they get more interesting and longer and complex as the series goes on, but I just didn't have time for it, and so I didn't read them all, and I just watched the movies. Yeah, so Outline by Rachel Cusk, and she's another author where, sort of controversially, I think I enjoyed Outline. I thought it was interesting and engaging, but it didn't strike me as hugely profound. It felt a bit too labored to me, and so I haven't read the other books in the series, but let me know what you think. If you're a big fan of the Outline trilogy or any of Rachel Cusk's books, let me know what you think. There's Atonement by Ian McEwan. I thought this was a really good novel. Probably doesn't stand out in my mind as one of the greatest novels. Actually, it was interesting. I was at a book party last night, and I was talking with someone about Ian McEwan, and we were both saying like, sort of gone off Ian McEwan, and I don't really understand why he's still so big and popular and considered one of the greatest British writers of the moment, and his books keep being made into films, and I think that's really why it's like keeping him going. And dare I say, I think like an older audience, like not an entire older audience, but I think an older audience appreciates his books a lot more than a younger audience. But I know not all older people will agree with that. But yeah, so I sort of feel that's why he's been on the list so much. And then another big book that I would totally agree with, The Year of Magical Thinking. This is so brilliant. It's like I was in tears reading it. It's such a like profound, moving, insightful book into the process of grief, and yeah, incredible. I went to see the stage production of this, which starred Vanessa Redgrave. It gave me a whole new, another appreciation of the book on top of the actual text itself, and yeah, it's incredible. So those are all books that got multiple votes on the list, and that I've read. And then another book that got multiple votes was Philip Roth's novel, The Plot Against America, which I thought was a great novel. I love alternate history novels that go back in a time of history and say what would have happened if things had changed and a different political group and country was ruling America today, and what would have happened. So I think that is really interesting to look at, and how it did really speak to our time as well in the 21st century of looking at these things, and it's probably even more relevant today as America as it is today, to go back and read this novel. So yeah, I mean, I'm not the hugest Philip Roth fan, but I think The Plot Against America is great, as well as his one of his later novels called Everyman, which was also published in the 21st century. I thought was also an amazing novel. Then The Line of Beauty by Alan Hollinghurst. I thought this novel was really great. Not my absolute favorite, like another Booker winner that like I think I've talked about with his writing before that like he has that Jamesian style, which I don't hugely connect with. I find a bit too ponderous, but is so honestly admirable, and I really enjoy aspects of it, but yeah, not my absolute favorite. The Road by Cormac McCarthy, incredible novel. Would totally agree that this is probably one of the greatest books of the 21st century so far. Terrifying post-apocalyptic vision of the world, and incredibly emotional, and yeah, so it has one of the scariest scenes I've ever read about in literature in this. Is terrifying, but also, yeah, just really struck me in my heart. The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, brilliant. I loved it. I just ate this book up, even though it's quite long. I read it really quickly in just a few days, because I was so glued to it and thought it was incredible. I do agree that probably the ending is a bit is complicated, difficult. Probably wasn't necessary, but yeah, as a whole, the book is incredible. And slightly controversially, like I like The Goldfinch more than her more beloved first novel. But I don't know, that's just my view. But what do you think about The Goldfinch, and what's your favorite Donna Tartt novel? Then there's Department of Speculation by Jenny Offel. Incredible novel. This is so inventive and does really do something different with the form of fiction, which I think has gone on to be so influential. So thinking of like canon books, and I think those are books that really give sort of a blueprint for how fiction can be going forward. And this is a novel which really set a precedent of how a novel can be written. So it's what I would call almost like an impressionistic style, where you see snippets of a life and about a relationship, but not the whole thing. But it comes together in such a moving way. And I thought it was incredible how she did that. Then there's The True History of the Kellygain by Peter Carey. And this is another Booker winner that wasn't my favorite book and not my favorite Peter Carey book. I thought it was good and engaging, but I honestly don't remember all that much about this novel. But his novel, Peter Carey's novel, My Life is a Fake, I think is a genius, beautiful novel, and which is a novel that just sort of came out and got sort of mixed reviews, and then it just died away, and nobody's really talked about it since then. But I think is a really great novel, and I think would stand out much more than True History of the Kellygain, in my opinion. Then there's Fingersmith by Sarah Waters, a brilliant, beautiful novel, and another novel that is, I think, one of those sort of blueprint novels and showing how historical novels can be written going forward, and what she does, showing a side of part of historical life that wouldn't be shown in novels from that period. And I thought that was something which was so interesting about this novel, and why it probably marks it out as one of the greatest books of the 21st century so far, as well as being an amazing story, such a gripping story that you just latch onto and don't want to stop reading. And so I love this so much. But again, like, I don't know if this would be it probably is my favorite Sarah Waters novel, but all of her novels are so great and engaging and fun that I think you could have a fun time arguing about which is really the best. Then there is Honored Guest by Joy Williams, a book of short stories which I read and I really appreciated at the time, but is another one of those books that I don't remember all that clearly, so I feel like I need to go back and read these stories and take more time with them, be a bit more patient with them. Then there is The White Tiger by Aravind Adiga, another Booker winner, and a novel that I was really into at the time, but it's another one of those books that maybe it's just been too many years, but I don't remember all that clearly, and so can't really defend or argue of why I think it's so great. And it's interesting, if you want to look at the list on the Vulture article, I like how they show some dissent, so they have long explanations of defending why these books are the greatest of the 21st century so far, and then with some of the books they have a dissent of why maybe it's not the greatest book, or suggesting another book by the same author of why they think this book by this author might be better or more interesting or could be defended as one of the greatest books. So yeah, White Tiger, I feel like I need to reread it. Just doesn't stand out in my mind all that strongly. Sense of an Ending by Julian Barnes, which I reread earlier. No, wait, was it last year? Yeah, I think last year. I reread it before the film version of the book came out, and is one of those books that, like, I read at the time and it just sort of passed me by, didn't make much of an impression. But when I reread Julian Barnes' novel, I thought it was incredible. It's such a brilliant book. It's quite short, so powerful about looking at history and memory and identity and how that affects our relationships with each other. And I thought the film version actually gave a really interesting, different dynamic and take on all those questions. And so, yeah, incredible book, totally belongs there, and is a reason why I think I need to go back and reread some of these books to give me a better appreciation of them, because I think with some books it does take time and rereading to really understand why they're so genius. I mean, maybe I'm just a bit slow on understanding why books are so good, and it takes me a second go around in order to really get it. Or maybe it is just a thing with, like, age and maturity. I can appreciate different aspects of books than I did at the time. So There's Anthony Marra's book, Constellation of Vital Phenomenon, which is a brilliant, beautiful novel, also looking at history in a really interesting way, and the relationship of a small group of people in really strange circumstances, and is beautifully written, so profound, wonderful. I really want to read his more recent book of short stories, How to Be Both by Ali Smith. I love this novel so much. Won the Bailey's Prize for Fiction and was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, another one of Ali Smith's books shortlisted for the Booker Prize, which sadly didn't win, and is an incredible novel. I loved it so much. Although I would say, and this can't really be decided for another couple of years totally, but probably Ali Smith's seasonal quartet will stand, I think, the test of time probably even more than this. But she is another one of those writers that I think is setting a blueprint for how fiction can go in the future, and is doing something so different with her fiction that, yeah, people are gonna be influenced by her by so many years, and she'll influence how the way fiction is gonna go going forward. So she definitely deserves to be on the list, no matter what book of hers you pick. Then A Brief History of Seven Killings by Marlon James. It feels like they're picking a lot of Booker winners, but probably it just shows my taste and interest that I follow the Booker Prize for a long time, so I happen to have read a lot of the books which have won the Booker Prize in the past several years, and A Brief History of Seven Killings definitely stands out on that list as an amazing novel. And when I was a judge on a book prize that year that this came out of, the Green Carnation Prize, and we picked this novel as our winner even though it had already won the Booker Prize. And especially because it's a really interesting novel about gay life, and there's a couple threads of the story which are about gay men and show a really different side to gay life, and I'm so glad that later on in this novel that those storylines really come out. And so we picked it for the Green Carnation Prize, which is a prize that awards LGBT authors, and so I'm glad we were able to highlight this aspect of the book. And then, speaking of gay fiction, then there's also Garth Greenwell's novel What Belongs to You on the list. So happy to see this on the list, because it is such a profound look at desire and human relationships, and yeah, his writing is so poetic and beautiful as well. Like, just the writing alone on this, I think, makes it stand out as one of the greatest books of the century so far. Valeria Luiselli's book, Tell Me How It Ends, this book of nonfiction, which is so meaningful and relevant for the world today. And I've talked about this early on this year, and it's one of my favorite reads of the year so far. This only came out in the UK at the end of last year, and yeah, about the process of immigration and the plight of children who are just trying to survive in the world, and the oppression of governments that can impede their progress and their livelihood. And I know it's an incredibly complicated issue, but this book gives such a meaningful perspective on that. And finally, there is Red Clocks by Lenny Zumas, which is another novel I read earlier this year, and which only just came out earlier this year. And I'm really surprised in a way to see it on the list, because it did strike me as really interesting, good novel. Especially, I was personally interested in it because of the interaction with the books of Virginia Woolf, the influence Virginia Woolf obviously had on her, and yeah, I thought it was a really moving, good novel, and a novel that really speaks of the politics of our time. It takes place in a slightly not so much dystopian future, but just in a future where abortion has been outlawed in America again, and so it does have a real political relevance for our times. But I would probably say that looking at Joyce Carol Oates' novel, A Book of American Martyrs, it gives a more rounded, interesting look at the question of abortion than Red Clocks, but Red Clocks is also really great. So, I would suggest reading these novels as a pair. So those are all the books that I've read so far. There's also Margaret Atwood's novel, Oryx and Crake, which I've also read and thought was really good, but didn't hugely stick with me, and I haven't read the other books in the trilogy yet. And going through thinking about the other novels, I haven't read Elena Ferrante's novels, which I know I really should have. There's Roberto Bolaño, who I know is a much lauded writer that I haven't read yet. There's Ben Lerner, Leaving the Untouched Station, which I've heard how he's hugely influential, and I just haven't read him yet. But then there are other authors that I have read, but haven't read these particular books. So there's Hilary Mantel. I haven't read Wolf Hall yet, another Booker Prize winner, but I've read some of her other books, which I absolutely loved. There's Elif Batuman, The Possessed, which, I read her other book, which was shortlisted for the Women's Prize this year, The Idiot, and I really enjoyed aspects of her book, but thought it was too long, so I sort of feel like The Possessed will probably be the same way. There's Helen Oyeyemi on the list, which I haven't read her novel Mr. Fox, but I've read her short stories, and I think she is so brilliant. I want to go on a reading binge and read all of her books, because I think she's incredible and is another writer that's doing really something interesting with the form of fiction. There's Zadie Smith for NW, which ironically, that's the only Zadie Smith novel that I haven't read. I've read all of her other novels and think she's amazing and great and one of the most interesting, influential thinkers of our time, and so definitely belongs on there. There's Louise Erdrich, there's Michael Chabon, there's Richard Powers, who's currently on the shortlist for his new novel, and The Time of Our Singing is on this list, but I'm reading his new novel, The Overstory, and I'm really enjoying it so far. There's also The Wizard of the Crow, which is a big historical novel that I've wanted to read and just haven't got to yet. And then there's also another recent novel called Gachar Gonchar by Vivek Shanbag, which I've wanted to read and just haven't got around to yet. It's such a short novel. I really should have read it so far, but yeah, a book that I really want to get to. So have a look through the list below. Let me know what you think of it, if there's any books on it that stand out and you agree with are some of the best and most important novels of the 21st century so far, or if you have alternate books that you would suggest should be on the list. Just really quickly, I would say that a recent poetry book, Don't Call Us Dead by Danez Smith, should be on the list. It's so incredible. There's The Parcel by Anosh Irani. I've talked about this novel so much, one of my favorite books of last year. The Lonely City by Olivia Laing. As I said already, Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeline Thien. There's Mrs. Engels by Gavin McCrea, is another incredible historical novel and is so emotional and meaningful to me. The Harvest, just Harvest by Jim Crace is an incredible novel. Blonde by Joyce Carol Oates, her novel reimagining the life of Norma Jean Baker. Incredible look at American history and also the question of gender and what expectations and are put on women and the idea of self-creation, and she wraps this all up in this real Dickensian type tale, which is so compulsively readable and brilliant. There's In America by Susan Sontag, which I would definitely put on the list. Both that and Blonde came out in the year 2000, so would qualify as 21st century novels. There's The Lacuna by Barbara Kingsolver, which I think totally deserves to be on the list. Half a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. It's a brilliant historical novel, really belongs on the list, and she is one of the most important writers today. And The Master by Colm Toibin. It's this brilliant novel reimagining the life of Henry James, and I think is so incredible and totally deserves recognition. So those are books that I would suggest should be on the list. But yeah, also let me know below if you think there are novels which or books that really belong as the most important books of the 21st century so far. So this has gone on much longer than I wanted it to, so I'm going to wrap it up. But let me know what you think below, how many books you've read, what you think of the list, what you think belongs on it and doesn't belong on it, and we can just have a fun old time arguing about it in the comments below. But thank you for watching, and I will speak to you again soon.